I am thrilled to introduce our final speaker for this week. We very much wanted to be able to hear from Susan and specifically to have Susan sending us off today. So the chance to have this final bit of inspiration and a shot in the arm as we all head back to our own homes and offices. I hope you had a chance to meet Susan over the course of the past couple days and enjoy conversation with her. Susan is by trade an art historian and curator, but she's also the founder and executive director of ARTZ Philadelphia, a small nonprofit dedicated to enhancing quality of life for people living with dementia in the greater Philadelphia region. Sounds familiar. She recently launched a new collaboration that I'm excited to hear more about with Philadelphia's Thomas Jefferson University called Arts at Jeff, in which people living with dementia and their care partners volunteer as the mentors for medical and other health professions at the university. Please help me in welcoming up Susan Shifrin.
Okay, so the burning question is, can you even see me? Okay, it is a real privilege and it's a little scary to have this spot on the program. First of all, I want to thank Jessica for inviting me. I want to thank Brittany and Jessica for an extraordinary conference. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've gone to a lot of conferences. I've organized a few conferences, and this, I still think they're not telling the truth when they say they haven't done this before. However, to get a little more serious, so my mandate from Jessica was to encourage us to think at this point in the conference, as we're heading home to get back into delivering programs, why is it important for us to do what we do? And I'm going to do my best to at least talk about some of the reasons that I think it's so important that you all do what you do. You see the title of the talk. I want to start by asking you, if you were to define the term empathy, what does empathy mean to you?
Feel for others.
To feel for others. Wonderful. Yeah.
Walk in another's shoes.
Walk in another's shoes. To feel for others, to walk in another's shoes. Ruth?
To understand what someone's experience means to them.
Wonderful. So it's not necessarily that we need or even could fully understand what someone else is going through, but we need to understand their experience of what they're going through. Wonderful. Anybody else? Yeah. Whoop, yeep, whoop.
Something about like being mindful and deliberate in how you're interacting with someone, like to put yourself in their shoes.
Absolutely. So it's really hard to have empathy if you're not mindful, if you're not intentional. Laurel?
I was going to say something similar, I guess, but the idea of respecting.
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
To listen well.
Ah, beautiful. To listen well. So wonderful. So those definitions are hanging in the air as we move forward. Museums' roles as community cornerstones and the related subject of museums' ethical responsibility to serve all visitors with empathy are two subjects near and dear to my heart. You've heard I'm an art historian by training. I've spent most of my career as a curator and museum educator, and I've taught college-level courses in art history, museum studies, visual studies. So the ways in which viewers and objects interact with each other, and the ways, most importantly, in which museums can enrich and deepen those interactions have always been a primary concern to me. That's both in my scholarship and in everyday practice, in my encounters with visitors and with objects. I want to begin the conversation today with a case that has been in the news a lot recently. Okay, you already know about it. Well, we'll see. So for those of you who don't know about it, this is a controversy surrounding a piece called Scaffold, a work by the Los Angeles-based artist Sam Durant. And I'm showing you here, and we'll show you a succession of photographs of the various installations of this piece. It was installed first in several sites in Europe. There is a photograph of the whole piece. And now you're walking up one of those sets of stairs that you saw, and you have reached a platform. And this, of course, includes a photograph showing people inhabiting the space of this sculpture. Just about a week ago, the LA Times ran a story in its arts and culture section that opened this way. A controversial sculpture inspired by gallows used in prominent US government executions, including the mass execution of 38 Dakota Indians in Mankato, Minnesota in 1862, will be removed from the sculpture garden at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis and ceremonially burned after generating an outcry among members of Native American groups. The sculpture had previously been erected at the Documenta exhibition in Germany in 2012 and Jupiter Artland in Scotland in 2014. The piece was set to be one of the new featured works in the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden, a public art park that has been under renovation since 2015 and was originally scheduled to reopen June 3rd. The crux of this case, this is my voice coming back, the crux of this case has generally been situated by commentators within the discourse of appropriation, questioning, does an artist from outside a particular racial or ethnic community have the right to appropriate that community's stories and retell or comment on them? So for example, the New York Times published an article with the headline, Emmett Till's Coffin, a Hangman's Scaffold, and a debate over cultural appropriation. But it seems to me that at its core, the case of Scaffold is more fundamentally about empathy among human beings and the responsibility of a museum to fulfill its obligations as a community cornerstone. Scaffold's artist, Sam Durant, himself indirectly suggests this in a statement he posted to the Walker Art Center blog. Durant writes, I made Scaffold as a learning space for people like me, white people who have not suffered the effects of a white supremacist society and who may not consciously know that it exists. It has been my belief that white artists need to address issues of white supremacy and its institutional manifestations. Whites created the concept of race and have used it to maintain dominance for centuries. Whites must be involved in its dismantling. However, your protests have shown me that I made a grave miscalculation in how my work can be received by those in a particular community. In focusing on my position as a white artist making work for that audience, I failed to understand what the inclusion of the Dakota 38 in the sculpture could mean for Dakota people. I offer my deepest apologies for my thoughtlessness. I should have reached out to the Dakota community the moment that I knew that a sculpture would be exhibited at the Walker Art Center in proximity to Mankato. So, 15 years ago, the board of directors of the American Association of Museums, now the Alliance, passed a museums and community resolution declaring that museums are community cornerstones. They are cultural symbols and contributors to community enterprise and providers of educational experiences. They are treasured places where memories are created and shared. But museums can also transform the way people view the world. They foster lifelong learning and encourage the expression of differing points of view. These strengths accord museums the opportunity to assume an expanded civic role in society. The list of operating principles elaborated further that museums are defining new relationships with communities based upon expanded mutual understanding, recognition of common concerns and interests, and a desire to collaborate for the benefit of the community. Collaboration between museums and communities requires sharing creativity, vision, responsibility, and resources. Then, just a little more than a year ago, the Alliance announced a new strategic plan promoting diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of museum structure and programming. This 4-year plan provides the following definitions for diversity and inclusion. So diversity, the quality of being different or unique at the individual or group level. This includes age, ethnicity, gender identity, language differences, nationality, parental status, physical, mental, and developmental abilities, race, religion, sexual orientation, skin color, socioeconomic status, education, work and behavioral styles, the perspectives of each individual shaped by their nation, experiences, and culture, and more. And then inclusion. Diversity always exists in social systems. Inclusion, on the other hand, must be created. In order to leverage diversity, an environment must be created where people feel supported, listened to, and able to do their personal best. Let's listen to that again. So, people feel supported. They feel listened to. And they feel able to do their personal best. I share this with you to emphasize the point that you're already aware of, I'm sure, that the organization that represents museum professionals and accredits museums throughout the United States has for more than a decade prioritized the functions of inclusiveness and community engagement among its members. So inclusiveness is equity, it's empathy, and we'll get to the dignity part. So sticking with scaffold just a little bit longer, it's against this backdrop of museum standards and ethics that we hear the voice of Kate Bean, a Dakota woman and historian who works as a community liaison for the Minnesota Historical Society. Bean has said of the scaffold controversy, "I don't think the walker or the artist took into consideration what kind of impact a structure like that would have on a community of people who have been impacted by historical trauma." Olga Viso, director of the Walker Art Center, sounded a strikingly similar note after a mediated agreement was reached by the Dakota elders, the museum, the artist, and other parties to this case. And she wrote, "There's no question that the Walker's process in placing the sculpture in the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden was flawed. I apologize that we were not sufficiently aware of the implications of its placement or sympathetic to the pain and suffering that it would elicit. We are deeply, deeply sorry and pledge to be better stewards of our relationship with communities going forward." In other words, it seems reasonable to conclude that in this case, and with no ill intent, which is important to say, the Walker Art Center neither demonstrated the expanded mutual understanding, recognition of common concerns and interests, and a desire to collaborate for the benefit of the community that was enshrined in the Communities and Museums Resolution, nor did it create an environment where people feel supported, listened to, and able to do their personal best. Okay, at this point, you are probably thinking to yourself, have I taken a wrong turn somewhere and gone to the wrong conference? What does any of this have to do with equity and empathy in museum programs for people living with dementia? Some of you are no doubt familiar with the slogan that is ubiquitous throughout the disability community, "Nothing about us without us." It's a slogan that rejects a condition of perpetual exclusion, not being heard or seen, not being valued, not being permitted, let alone assumed, to speak for oneself. It's the condition that underlies the protests that have resulted in the dismantling of scaffold, and it's one of the conditions concomitant with living with a dementia diagnosis in today's world. And this, I want to say, is the fundamental connection between the case of scaffold and the programs and services that you all commit to every day. A little bit about ARTZ. We're a small mid-Atlantic nonprofit that offers opportunities for self-expression and the rebuilding of self-esteem to people with dementia and their care partners through interactions around arts and culture-based programming. I founded ARTZ Philadelphia in 2013 on the conviction that people living with dementia should be accorded the benefits of well-being and quality of life that others enjoy. It's kind of a no-brainer. We are committed at ARTZ Philadelphia to supporting and celebrating people with dementia and their care partners as valued members of our wider creative community. One of our regular program participants was interviewed last year on National Public Radio about his experiences of living with dementia. Carl D. is a retired physicist diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2014. He describes analyzing his growing inability to draw a clock or to use clocks to tell time, and then retraining himself to tell time based on his deconstruction of the layers of meaning embedded in a clock face. Carl's capacity for imaginative and complex reasoning is still very much in evidence. As he says, while he may have retaught himself how to read a clock, there is no path back to when he could take such skills for granted. He can only focus on moving forward, building on his abilities that persist. It's often assumed that people with dementia are incapable of acquiring new skills or knowledge. We, of course, know differently. Carl embodies the capacity for finding a way forward that makes meaning in and of his post-diagnosis existence. This paradigm shift from incapacity to capacity, from dead end to a way forward, is the basis for the collaboration that Jessica mentioned, a new collaboration between ARTZ Philadelphia and Thomas Jefferson University, which, if you don't know of it, is one of the country's most venerable medical schools. ARTZ Philadelphia's programs and museum galleries are becoming a proving ground through this collaboration for how profoundly we can realize that paradigm shift. In ARTZ Jeff, an arts and dementia mentoring initiative, medical and other healthcare profession students from across the university are learning from a new cohort of mentors, people living with dementia and their care partners. The promotional blurb we used for the program, "To attract mentors," describes it in this way. Do you ever feel that if your doctor had time to get to know you better, she would be able to better care for you? Thomas Jefferson University and ARTZ Philadelphia have launched a new program together, and we hope you'll be a part of it. Through ARTZ at Jeff, a Jefferson student will have the chance to spend time getting to know you or your loved one better as a person. You will have the chance to mentor that student about what it means to you to live with dementia. Art will be the vehicle that brings you together, and together you may well change forever the way things work. It's a little overdramatic, but there you are. So what does this program seem to mean, and what might it augur for people living with dementia and for their care partners? There has been extensive research and much written in the last decade regarding the various ways in which people across the globe who are living with dementia define quality of life. A number of studies have specifically focused on the role of dignity preservation as a prime contributor to quality of life. For instance, Van Gennep et al. Noted in 2014 that a number of qualitative studies have indicated that the way in which individuals with dementia are treated by others has a significant impact on their experience of the disease, and that the views of and treatment by others can perhaps be seen as the primary cause of the loss of self and self-esteem. A 2010 study by Hegestad et al., assessing Norwegian nursing home residents' experiences of dignity by means of interviews with residents living with dementia, yielded recurring theoretical themes relating to dignity, such as dignity related to confirmation, dignity related to freedom, dignity related to belonging. One interviewee declared, "The most important is that they listen to what I have to say." The study's authors conclude, the reason why we often think that persons with dementia lack the ability to make autonomous choices in their daily life, maybe because we often see the diagnosis with all the problems that follow. The diagnosis of dementia becomes the master status of the person. Not being seen as a person, or only being seen as a member of a group, for instance, member of a patient group, may be experienced as violation of a person's dignity. To avoid this threat to dignity, we should, to a greater extent, ask the persons with dementia what they think is important in order to live a good life, and see them as experts on their own lives. We should confirm the person and his or her individual identity, which exists behind the disease. I just want to bring this slide back because you may hear echoes of the strategic plan in these studies, remembering that feeling supported, feeling listened to, feeling able to do one's personal best. There are connections here. It is against the backdrop of and in direct response to the research regarding dignity preservation and other crucial quality of life factors defined in large part by people living with dementia and their care partners, that we've designed our programs in general, and ARTZ Jeff in particular, in relation to which we assess the program's efficacy and impact. And I just want to show you a few more slides from the program to give you a sense of what it looks like. So this is a one-on-one conversation between a mentor and her student. In some cases, we do two-on-two. If the care partner and or the person with dementia feel more comfortable mentoring together, then both of their students sit with both of them. In this case, Len and Eve is entering into perhaps late middle to early late stage, and so she has difficulties talking sometimes. Other times, she speaks in full, beautiful sentences. It's amazing. And Carl, again, holding forth with his students. So the insights of our participants, above all, will tell us where we need to focus our efforts now and in the future. I'm including here some documented responses from studies that have taken place in England. Paul Kamek has done a great deal of work looking at the benefits for museums, caregivers, and people living with dementia of gallery-based programs like the ones we've been talking about. Paul quotes in a couple of studies that he's done with colleagues, "I was treated so well at the art gallery, it made me feel I wasn't a drain. I've never been made to feel this welcome in healthcare or social services." And quoted later in the study, "I was very conscious at the gallery that we were people working together and were treated as equals, and not as a person with a memory problem, but as two people with something to contribute, and that was a good thing." The third quotation is from one of our program participants. She's the care partner for her father. And she writes, "I feel so lucky to be able to participate in these museum programs alongside everyone. Those with the so-called memory impairments only enhance my experience. I've learned so much from the entire group that I'm continuously blown away by the experience." And a few comments from mentors about their experience of ARTZ Jeff. "It's difficult to have meaningful communication that we can share anymore. Looking and talking about the art, we were able to talk like a couple again. My wife really liked her student, and I really felt that she was really helping him and contributing to others again." His wife was an emergency room nurse, and she now has primary progressive aphasia. One of our mentors with dementia said, "I think our students got a lot from it on how to evaluate all aspects of a patient's life, not just the diagnosis." And one of the care partners said, "I only see good coming from this." And then the students, who are just as remarkable as their mentors, say, "It gave us an opportunity to see people who have dementia as more than just their condition. I think in a busy clinical setting, it can be all too easy to see a dementia patient for just that, a dementia patient. But I think because of this program, we'll all be very quick to recognize dementia patients as people who had quite meaningful lives and still have a lot to offer. And another student writes, "This program has given me so much to think about and so many valuable lessons from the mentors." Ultimately, the issues we've been considering this afternoon and really throughout this superb symposium are, simply put, issues of honoring personhood. And as I bring this to a conclusion, I want to mention the work of Michael Kitwood. Kitwood was an ordained priest to start with, became a psychologist, professor at Bradford University in England, and he was actually, he has been credited with being the first to inaugurate the term person-centered care in relation to people with dementia. So a person of impact in our fields. So he writes in one of his most famous books, "In dementia, many aspects of the psyche that had for a long time been individual and internal are again made over to the interpersonal milieu. Memory may have faded, but something of the past is known. Identity remains intact because others hold it in place. Thoughts may have disappeared, but there are still interpersonal processes. Feelings are expressed and meet a validating response. And if there is a spirituality," remember, he's an ordained priest, "it will most likely be of the kind that Buber describes, where the divine is encountered in the depth of I-thou relating." Now, for those of you to whom that sounds a little bit like gobbledygook, the I-thou versus I-it dichotomy is a matter of personhood versus objecthood. So in an I-thou relationship, the attitude of the I to the thou is that it is an equal relationship. The other in the relationship is fully acknowledged. The relationship, the partnership, is an end in itself and not a means to some other end, something to be used. The I-it relationship, on the other hand, you see where this is going. In that kind of relationship, the attitude of the I towards an it is more or less the attitude of an I towards an object that is separate, not an equal part of any kind of relationship, and to be used, either used or acted upon. So you can see, I think, how deeply this relates to the issue of how we treat people living with dementia, and how their care partners treat them, and how they treat their care partners. At the beginning of my talk, I was privileged to introduce you to Carl D., retired physicist, NPR interviewee, beloved husband of Susan J., newly emerging artist, that's a whole other story, and a person just trying to live his life meaningfully and navigate the way forward with dementia. It's Carl who gave this talk its title, and it's Carl who helps me to bring it to a close. Carl reminds us, all of us, that our programs, our institutions, must be dedicated above all to ensuring that we treat those we serve with equity and empathy, and that we honor their dignity. Or, taking us back to scaffold, in the words of filmmaker and director Sheldon Wolfchild, one of the most vocal Dakota protesters of the Walker Arts Center installation, and a great-grandson of one of the Dakota 38 whose hanging it memorialized. We need to understand that we have to look at each other as common human beings from the heart. So just before we close, I want to reemphasize something that I think Laurel brought up in her talk yesterday, and to revisit one more question. And that's the question. In museums, whose responsibility is it in the end to ensure equity and empathy? Yeah. And I'm sure all of us, Well, actually, yeah, the restaurant. Imagine a restaurant that does not seat someone because they're acting out, or is not willing to seat someone in a place that is going to make him or her more comfortable. I think probably all of us who have tried to make the case for our museums of the importance of this kind of work have encountered some roadblocks in these various areas. But of course, it has to be all of the above. There we go. This was a very short talk because we're all brain dead at this point. So I'm happy to take any questions you have or to tell you more about the program, but thank you.
So how do people come to your program? And who do you see yourself serving?
That is a really vital question, and it's one of our challenges. When we first started doing programs, we actually got referrals from the Penn Memory Center. And it was Penn Memory Center patients who were the bulk of our programs. It then started spreading by word of mouth. So one of the couples who became regulars in the program, the wife went back to her support groups, and she happened to be in 3 at the time. And I joked with her that I really ought to be hiring her because she proselytized. And in some ways, that is the best way to get program participants because it's much easier to trust someone who's in the trenches with you than it is, some woman who's offering some program. But as you can imagine, in greater Philadelphia, actually in Philadelphia alone, I think the current statistics are there are 100,000 people with Alzheimer's disease, not even including, the 129 other kinds of dementia. And that, of course, doesn't include their care partners. So we have a huge population of people living with dementia. And right now, at our outside limits, we're serving about 1,500 people. So part of the challenge is we're a very small organization. I do most of the facilitating, and I have, thankfully, an almost full-time outreach and volunteer coordinator. But there's only so much we can do. We do have an artist who works with us for our art-making programs. So that's one problem. That goes back to that issue of scalability that keeps coming up. The other problem is how do we reach all of the, nearly probably 200,000 people? And that has been a continuing challenge for us. One of the really the benefits of the ARTZ program that I didn't anticipate is that mentors who come to us to do that program and have never come to anything else that we do start coming to our programs, which is really but it's all so small scale. So it is something that we are working on. We're starting to focus on making connections with much more traditionally underserved communities. So, programs like ours are generally populated with people who are middle class to upper middle class. And this is not in any way to suggest that they don't have their own agonizing needs. But for people who are living in disadvantaged communities of color where the stigmas are even more damaging and pervasive, that's where our programs should be. And we're starting to make connections with people in the Latino community, people in the African American community, where we're going, we believe very deeply that we have to work from the community out. So we need to forge credible partnerships with people in the community who can then help us to build trust with community members. That was a very long-winded response, sorry. Yes.
How are you making those connections with the underserved populations?
So we have actually, I'm not entirely sure why, but in recent months, we have had healthcare centers and other social service centers reach out to us. There is a healthcare center in a part of Philadelphia that is heavily populated by the Latino community. They invited me to come introduce our program, and the director of programs at the center was translating because sadly I don't speak Spanish. And it was probably the most extraordinarily engaged time I've spent, and I give talks all the time. It was incredible. They were coming up saying, can we volunteer? How do we get this in our community? So they did us an incredible service by just inviting us to come talk. The Penn Memory Center has, which is again one of our research partners, has a position dedicated to diversity and inclusion, and she has been helping us to make connections. So it's painstakingly slow, but when the connections get forged, there's a real sense that something's going to happen.
So I'm also in the Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area. So there's an organization called ARTZ. Are you working with them at all?
No, we are not. ARTZ, there are actually ARTREACHs throughout the country, I think. I certainly know that Philadelphia is but one of the ARTREACHs. And the mission is a wonderful mission. The idea is to provide deeply discounted access to cultural, artistic, any kind of program in the arts that someone might want to attend, and because of a disability, for people with disabilities. So most, I would say a good chunk of the museums in the Philadelphia area work with ARTREACH to provide discounted admission to special exhibitions, to general admission, dance, theater, music.
Children's Museum.
Yeah. So that's, it's an incredibly important mission.
But it's not just physical disability, it's also income inequity. So people with access cards who have state assistance with food get significantly reduced admission.
Right. That's right.
So,
It is, sadly, even in the world of people all working towards, ostensibly working towards the same goals. I know it will shock you to hear that there's politics involved. And unfortunately, in this particular case, that has gotten nowhere. But, I mean, we wouldn't exist without partnerships. I mean, we just wouldn't. So that is one of the rare instances in which I regretfully say no, we're not.
Susan, two questions, if I may. Fascinated by the setting of some of those, where you are.
Yeah.
You know, it's very textured, wonderful. And my other question is, could you explain again the mentor?
Yes.
The definition of that.
Sure. So what you see here is a panoply of programs and photographs of those programs. So the gateway here, which is wonderfully symbolic from my point of view, is at Philadelphia's Magic Gardens. And who said I've been there? Yes! It is, I don't even know where to start. It is unique, it is jewel-like, it is magical, truly magical. And we have been working to form a partnership for 3 years now. And it's not for lack of wanting to that it's kind of been limping along. However, Magic Gardens has become one of the sites for our ARTZ program. So all of the blue and green and anything with bright colors in it practically is Magic Gardens. Yeah. The banner being painted on an outside porch is actually at Woodmere Art Museum, which is our longest-lived museum partner, where we do monthly programs, usually conversation-based in the galleries. But we also sometimes do art making as well. And that particular banner is evidence of something that we do every year. We have an annual exhibition of the work done by people in our art making programs. In the lead up to that, we host a series of community engagement days where we create some sort of large-scale project that is a good way to involve a group of 6 to 10 people with dementia, generally living in a care community, and volunteers from the community who haven't volunteered with us before. It's a one-day volunteer bonanza extravaganza. And so that banner, 2 years ago, our large community engagement project was painting 9-foot banners and using paints in the colors of the ARTZ logo. And really, if we gave a prompt at all, which we really didn't have to because people would just pick up the brushes and go, the only prompt we really used was, what does joy look like? So that's the banner. And then there are some care community settings. This is also at Woodmere, a watercolor project in the galleries. And then some in Jefferson classrooms. So we go wherever. And Judy, in response to your question about mentors. So our premise for ARTZ is that we literally wanted to turn upside down the general hierarchy of patient-doctor. Now, these are not yet doctors, but they are first-year medical students, second year, sometimes third year, and they're going to be doctors. So in order to participate in this program, they essentially have to agree to leave their doctorness at the door and to come in knowing that they know nothing, and that the authorities in this setting are their mentors who have dementia or live. And I have to say, I get a little choked up with this, but I have to say, Jefferson has been an incredible partner. And this program is part of an overall effort that they're making to try to figure out how to put the empathy back into medicine, because the data, Jefferson is the originator of the empathy scale, for those of you who know about it. And the doctor, Dr. Hoja, who created that empathy scale, has been studying for years whether and how long medical students retain their empathy. By their third year, it's basically gone.
Oh, wow.
And that is not just a Jefferson statistic. That's throughout the country. So they are doing really wonderful, innovative things to try to figure out how to put the empathy back in. And ours is one of those programs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
had a question that kind of relates to the question that she was asking before about your collaboration with that other group. I was kind of going to an economic question, sort of multi-part maybe. One is, do you charge folks who are participating in your programs? And if not, and it's both the nature not charging also, where's the sustainability model for that? And concomitant with that, is that really equity by not charging somebody with it? Isn't that putting them in other, you're an other, we're helping you. We are the good guys. You are in need of our help, even though you might have money.
Fair enough. All of those are fair questions. So.
And where do you fit that in?
Okay. So let me start and go backwards. Probably by the time I go backwards, you're going to have to remind me what the first question was. But the reason we do not charge is because we know, and there are plenty of data to back this up, that people living with dementia have, if not financial hurdles up the wazoo, they are surrounded by one hurdle after another. Some of our participants could not afford to pay, can't even afford to park. So if we're somewhere where they would have to park on the street, they can't come. So I essentially, as the founder of this organization, made the decision, finances are not going to be an impediment here. But you make a good point. How is that equity if everyone else has to pay? It turns out that I was actually kind of savvy and didn't have a clue that I was, because I would say probably at least 50%, if not more, of our program participants make individual donations. And yes, they make individual donations, and in the end, and we see those individual donations go up year on year. So in the end, by earning their trust and by showing empathy for their situations, in the end, it has made them feel tremendous ownership for the program. So in terms of sustainability, we might as well just expose our history here, why not? Our first year, our budget was zero. It was me. I did everything, and I did it on a volunteer basis. Second year, our budget was $30,000. Last year, it was more than twice that, and this year, it's going to be close to $200,000. That's not all because of individual donations, but 50% of that is individual donations. So I think in terms of sustainability, actually a number of us were talking about this, about how do you make a program that by its nature has to be intimate and small to do what it's supposed to do. How do you make that scalable? How do you make it sustainable? And I can't even remember who it was, but I think the answer to that is do what we're doing here. It has to be across the sector. It has to be that we are all generous enough with each other that, number one, none of us can handle, not a single institution in Philadelphia could handle 100,000 people. So you form partnerships, and in each case, you figure out what the threshold is for sustainability at that institution, and then you share and you collaborate. It's not a usual business model, but